Another important thing to learn about is system requirements for Server 2016. So one thing that I want to add here is not only for Server 2016, for any application, for any other operating system, there are always system requirements, and system requirements are always different. So anytime you buy a server, anytime you buy a laptop where you're going to install an application, you always check for system requirements, because system requirements is something that is going to help you in future, so you will not run into performance issues. So for example, Windows Server 2016 actually supports 1.4 gigahertz 64-bit processor. So if you're buying a 32-bit processor, it's not going to work. So most of the times when you buy a server, when you buy a system for a server 2016 or any other, always check that if it really supports 32-bit or 64-bit, because 32-bit is something that is supported only by like some other operating system. Like if you remember, server 2003 was supporting 32-bit, but these days modern operating system, because because of the performance, the 64-bit processor is supported so that it can provide you better performance, because of the speed is much higher with 64-bit. Another thing that you see here is 512 MB of RAM. This is the minimum requirement that you really need to have with Server 2016, but it does not doesn't actually mean that you just go and buy 1 GB of RAM with a server. That is actually not how it works. You need to buy something that is actually 2 GB, 4 GB or more, because these days the applications that you install, they always requires to have better hardware requirements, because their requirements are now higher and higher, because those applications are actually performing very well. Those applications are actually giving you much better features, and they can do a lot of things for you. So that's why whenever you buy a server, you always go with higher system specifications, so that in future you can add more applications to it. So the RAM is 512. If you want to install like services like file services, you can actually use 2 GB or 4 GB. But if you are trying to practice for at home in your laptop, like on a virtual box, you can actually use 512 if you have less RAM in your laptop. So my recommendation is minimum always go with 4 GB, maximum go with like 4 or 8 GB. But if you can go higher, that's better. But it always again depends on the requirements that you have. What applications are you going to install? As we just saw in our lab, that how can we research, how can we find out. So the disk space is 32 GB. So now my question from you is, how are you gonna determine, like how are you going to find out like how much of a space I need? If you're going to install SQL Server, if you're going to install Exchange Server, you need to understand that those servers are the servers where you always store data. Every day you are storing data in it. So it means that they can actually use a lot of space in your system. So you will always choose the higher capacity for your hard drive. But if you are using something like DHCP server, DNS server, they do not require a lot of disk space, so you don't have to worry. 200 GB or 250 GB is good enough. But if I am installing Exchange or SQL, I will always go 500 GB or 1 terabyte, because they can get full very soon. Another thing is network. So network that it can support is 10, 100, and 1000 BST. So like you can see that we have different supports. These days, all servers that we purchase, they are coming in like gigabit speed. They are no longer coming with like fast Ethernet, like 100 megabits per second. Now it's 1000 megabits per second. So we are getting very good speed from those um, servers that we are buying. So this is the requirement for the network that we have. And then DVD, video that you see there, um, 1024 by 768 or higher is going to be supported, but it's optional. Keyboard and mouse, and then internet broadband access, that's optional too. So these are the system requirements, minimum system requirements. Again, my tip and my recommendation to you is anytime you are buying an operating system, you're buying a server, always check for the requirements. Always make sure what kind of operating system you're going to install on what kind of server. Is that server going to be good enough? What kind of applications you're going to install, and what is the requirement of that application? And based on that, you can actually buy a good server, you can buy a good application, you can buy a good operating system, so that it will help you in long term, and in long run it will not create any issues. So this is how you can actually buy a server, and this is the system requirement. I hope this was useful, and I'll see you